It was down in old Joe's barroom, the corner by the square. They're serving drinks as usual, and the usual crowd was there. On my left stood Big Joe McKennedy. His eyes were bloodshot red, and he looked at the gang around him. These are the very words he said. He said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will." Anyway, excuse me for that digression. We're talking about the magical sword today. And to tell you the truth, has a lot to do with that guitar also. So let's talk about our magical sword, reading from the book Homemade Magic. Chapter 7. Good morning, everyone. The Magical Sword. The epigram is from Aleister Crowley's Liber ABA, Book 4. The magic sword is the analytical faculty, attributed to air, all wandering, all penetrating, but unstable. The sword, necessary as it is to the beginner, is but a crude weapon. Its function is to keep off the enemy or to force a passage through them. And though it must be wielded to gain admission to the palace, it cannot be worn to the wedding feast. Okay, the pentacle is engraved with a symbol that represents the magician's universe. The sword represents the word that represents the magician's universe. This can actually be a word, a noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, adjective, preposition, conjunction, or interjection in some language that is meaningful to you. Engraved upon the blade of an actual sword. Or the word of the sword can be a more subtle vibratory expression of your universe than that which can be articulated by sounds originating in your meat larynx and pushed over your flapping tongue and out of your mouth. I'd like to be able to tell you that I made my magic sword myself. That I, like the ancient magicians, dug the ore out of the ground with a shovel I had fashioned myself. That I smelted the ore in the heat of charcoal I made from the wood of a tree I planted myself as a young boy and then chopped down myself. That I hammered the raw metal into a blade, etc. I'd like to be able to share with you the secret of the magic word I engraved upon its shining blade. Shazam! Abracadabra! Etiquette. Etiquette is DuQuette spelled backwards, which is indeed a magic word. But I didn't do any of those things. I bought my magic sword at an antique store near my home in Costa Mesa, California. That's it right there. Okay. But before you chastise me for being lazy and unmagical, which you can do, I'd like to share with you the circumstances surrounding its acquisition and what my magic sword means to me, how it qualifies to be my word. Hopefully, the story will give you some idea of what these homemade magical weapons are truly about and what you'll need to do to create your own or earn your own. My sword is a beautiful but modest Masonic Knights Templar ceremonial sword made in the United States somewhere between 1893 and 1923. The best I can determine. There are thousands of them still cluttering the walls of antique stores and attics all over the world, and if you're lucky, you can probably still find one for yourself for less than $100. I had been shopping for a good ceremonial sword ever since I was made master of Haru Raha Lodge OTO in January of 1978. Not only is a lightweight sword a necessary tool used in all OTO degree initiation ceremonies, but it's also the weapon of the priestess in the Gnostic Mass, the order's publicly celebrated ritual. In other words, both Constance and I needed a good sword in the house. I located the sword of my dreams at a local antique store. It was a Masonic Knights Templar commander's sword, in good shape, for something at least 80 years old at the time, and adorned with esoteric symbols that are just as appropriate to the ceremonial magic as they are to Freemasonry. It was the perfect length and weight and came with its original scabbard, also beautifully and appropriately adorned. It was reasonably priced, but at the time, I didn't have the money to buy it. In fact, I didn't have money to buy much of anything. Looking back, I'm happy that I didn't have the funds to just purchase it when I first saw it in the shop, because if I had just thrown it in my shopping cart, that particular sword might never have gotten itself infused with much magic. But I'll get to that part of the story in a moment. I need to tell you that my magic sword didn't start out as a sword. First, it was a guitar. A very special guitar. It was a handsome instrument, the finest I'd ever owned. A 1968 C.F. Martin D28 with a butter-smooth setup and rich response that was just perfect for my then primitive rhythm accompanied style. I selected it from out of a dozen high-end guitars I sampled at Johnny Thompson Music, the legendary store in El Monte, California that serviced the artists and bands that populated the touring and recording culture of that golden age of popular music. Our producer at Epic Records drove my partner Charlie and me there one afternoon in early 1970 and told us, pick out whatever you want. I loved that guitar and broke it in, writing songs and recording 2 singles and an album, and playing more live performances than my hashish-addled years of sex, drugs, and rock and roll will permit me to remember. A friend and a guitar student of mine who happened to be a master woodworker begged me to allow him, for an insanely reasonable price, to inlay the neck and headstock with mother of pearl and abalone shell. He adorned the fret markers with generous double triangles of mother of pearl, and at the 12th fret he placed the Roman numeral 93 in iridescent green, blue, and pink abalone shell. On the headstock he inlaid in abalone shell the name C.F. Martin, which plunged proudly between the rows of gold Schaller tuning posts. The crowning glory of my sweet Martin was the inlaid Egyptian winged solar disk, Hadith, centered at the top of the headstock. Every feather was a separate iridescent piece of mother of pearl or abalone shell, cut and ground individually at a different angle and polished so it caught and reflected light from a different direction. As the guitar moved under the stage lights, the feathers appeared to flutter and dazzle the eye. Did I say it was a handsome guitar? It was breathtaking. My most precious possession. The apple of my eye and ear. It was coveted by every guitarist who laid his eyes on it. In my mind, the guitar, more than anything else, more than my songs, more than my live performances, more than my own talent, real or imagined, even more than my recording career. The guitar defined who and what I was as an artist. It was my Excalibur. But in December of 1978, Magick had become my art. I no longer made a living on stage in the studio. I had over-enjoyed the excesses of the aspiring rock star. I was married. I was a married man with a beautiful wife and little son, born in 1972. And in spite of the wild and wonderful adventures I experienced on the road, I really did want to be a good husband and stable father. The alcohol, drugs, and the ladies ultimately couldn't compete with the love and warmth of my little family. For several years after I said goodbye to music, I worked a string of low-paying technical positions in the medical device manufacturing industry. The jobs barely paid the rent on our little apartment in Costa Mesa. There was very little left over every month for food. I must confess, the DuQuettes owed our existence to the almost supernatural thriftiness of my dear wife, Constance. Christmas that year fell on a Monday. The company I was working for gave us only one day off for the holiday. Management waited till the end of the day on Friday, December 22nd, to announce that, regrettably, there would be no Christmas bonuses or year-end gifts for the hourly employees. Now, even though the DuQuettes aren't Christians, our family loves the Christmas season and makes the most of the cultural celebration. That year, Constance had brought home an inexpensive little tree strapped to her bicycle. She did that every year. She went out and bought a Christmas tree and drove it home on her bicycle. She had to lay it sideways. It looked like she was riding a bicycle down the street. She's became infamous in Costa Mesa, the tree lady. But I digress. It was gaily decorated and had been emanating its Jovian perfume into our little living room for over a week. A handful of small homemade gifts were already wrapped and under the tree, but the real gifts I was planning to get for Constance and little Jean Paul had yet to be purchased, awaiting the Christmas bonus money that was not going to come. I felt pretty much like Bob Cratchit in Dickens' A Christmas Carol, faced with the grim prospect of delivering bad news to his family on Christmas Eve. I sat in my little cubicle at work and wallowed for a few minutes in self-pity. It was not a very dignified attitude for someone who wanted to start to identify himself as a serious magician. In fact, I didn't feel like much of a magician at all. Poverty had dogged us from the moment I abandoned my recording career in 1972. My real-world jobs to this point had served barely to keep our heads above water. I was hoping that this Christmas would be different, a cheery and festive occasion for Constance and little Jean Paul. Like the Christmases my hard-working parents had managed to throw for my brother and me in the 1950s. It then occurred to me that I had one asset, one golden treasure that I might sacrifice on the altar of Christmas to save the day. My Martin. Even without the custom inlay work, it was easily worth $1,000. I didn't, however, have time to find a buyer to give me close to what it was worth. It was too precious an item to pawn for just a few dollars, so I insanely set a low figure of $350, the amount I estimated my bonus would have been, and resolved that if I could immediately get that much money for the instrument, I would sell it and go Christmas shopping. I swung by our apartment after work and picked up my precious D28, then drove directly to Coast Music in Costa Mesa. They knew me there. During our recording years, Charlie and I were local Hollywood recording star celebrities. The owner also knew my guitar and was forever suggesting that I sell it to him. Late as it was in the day, the store was still full of customers, mostly professional musicians shopping for supplies for holiday gigs. The owner was happy to see me and lamented the fact that I hadn't been in for a while. I laid the guitar case on the display case and said flatly, "I'm selling my Martin." He looked surprised and genuinely sad. Still, there was a glint of greed in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" was his first response. I nodded in the affirmative. He sighed and started to open the case. He says, "Okay, I'll write it up and put it on consignment. What's your asking price?" "I don't want to put it on consignment," I told him. "I want to sell it to you right now for $350 in cash." He looked at me in complete disbelief. He flared his nostrils in a not so subtle attempt to sniff out alcohol or drugs on my breath. "I can't do this, Lon. Give it some thought." "I've given it a lot of thought. It's Christmas Eve. I need $350 for the family's Christmas." He closed his case and said, "Sorry, man. I couldn't live with myself. It's your baby. You don't want to do this. Okay, I said, if it'll make you feel better, you can give me the money and throw in a replacement guitar from off the wall. He thought for a moment and said, okay. He then walked over to the wall display of guitars and picked up a beautiful new Gibson J45. Will this do? Sure, I said, if it'll make you feel better. A Gibson J45 is a pretty fine instrument and represented an extremely generous trade. A few minutes later, I walked out of the store with $350 in cash and a new guitar. I headed straight to the antique store and purchased 2 items, a rocking chair Constance had admired and my Magick sword. Constance and I spent the rest of the Magick cash at the toy store. In the spring, I sold the Gibson to a friend as well, and for the next 29 years, I didn't own or play a guitar. I left the world of music and embarked on the study and practice of ceremonial magic and the associated arts. My sword, my store-bought, inexpensive Masonic ceremonial blade, has gotten quite a workout in the last 40 years. I wouldn't dream of trading it for a new one. It's my Excalibur. It's my Sting. It's my No-Thung. I carry it in dreams and visions. With it, I've done battle with the dragons of my own nightmares, banished demons, and stormed the gates of heaven. My cheap Masonic sword is the material metaphor of my word. I needed it to find my voice, the voice of my own great work for which my old Martin was merely a pre-echo. With my sword, I banish the demons of indolence and laziness and invoke the gods of discipline and focus and pierce the mysteries of my own soul until I cut through and found my magical voice, the word of my own great work. Every word I write, every sentence, every poem, every book that pours onto the page is my work, is my word. My sword is my tongue, my keyboard, my computer, my printer, my telephone, my networks of friends, of brothers and sisters and colleagues. What is your word? The answer to that question will hand you your magic sword. It's likely you'll try out many lesser swords before you find the true one, but once again, you have to start somewhere. And there's no time like the present. But before I give you a bit of sword shopping advice, I'd like to share the latest episode in my Magic Sword adventure. It seems that my magic has come full circle. My original magic sword has come back to me, as surely as if it had been returned newly forged from the hand of the Lady of the Lake. No, my old Martin D28 didn't appear miraculously at my doorstep, but something almost amazing happened. A couple of years ago, after a break of 35 years, I started writing songs again. It seemed like a natural evolution of my writing and magical career. I've been lucky to secure a song publisher and a record label, and I really enjoyed playing a few songs at my talks and workshops. Shortly before my 65th birthday, I entered one of my newly recorded songs in a national songwriting competition. I shamelessly appealed to my family, friends, and colleagues and social workers to listen to it, and if they absolutely didn't hate it, vote for it. When the contest ended and the votes were counted, I won first place. The prize? A beautiful, new, and rather expensive Alvarez Masterworks guitar. Okay. Making or selecting your homemade sword. As I confessed earlier, I don't have the skill or the wherewithal to fabricate a proper sword. If you're blessed with those skills, or if you know someone who is, I encourage you to think long and hard about the design of both the blade and the handle. Then commence or commission the project. If you resolve to buy or obtain an existing manufactured sword, which is probably what most modern magicians must do, here are a few ideas you might find helpful. Keep in mind that your magic sword is a ceremonial sword. If it is too large or heavy, you will not be able to hold it up for the long periods of time that are necessary, especially in spirit evocations. An oversized sword will defeat you faster than the most dangerous demon. For symbolic reasons, a double-edged blade is preferable to one single-edged edge. This is a sword, after all, and not a big knife. It's not an axe or a hatchet or a machete. Even a letter opener type dagger is preferable to a knife. There is a magical weapon called the magical knife, and it does specific things. It is not a sword, though. I digress. Your sword should come to a point at the end. However, neither the tip nor the edges should be dangerously sharp. It's a ceremonial, symbolic weapon. The foes you will be conjuring, battling, banishing, and intimidating with the sword are spiritual adversaries and not flesh and blood. You will also likely be using your sword in group ceremonies, often in small, cramped temple spaces. Over the year, I've been in too many ceremonies that were interrupted by accidental injuries inflicted by magicians brandishing a razor-sharp ceremonial sword. It is very awkward to explain to an ambulance driver why your bleeding house guest is wearing a black hooded robe. Do you think I'm exaggerating? No. That's a story in itself. But anyway, when shopping for your sword, pay attention to how it is balanced in your hand. You will feel an indescribable pleasure and a powerful sense of confidence in the deepest recesses of your soul when you pick up a perfectly balanced sword. Pick up 1,000 swords if you have to until you feel that power. When you do, that's your sword. Finally, and I know you're saying you're going too long today, Lon, but there's only one more paragraph. Ideas for on-the-road improvised homemade sword. Now, once you've designed and made or obtained your sword, you will have, in essence, installed it permanently in your magic self. I said the same thing about the disc. That's where it truly exists. That's where you use it. From that point on, any material object you choose to be your sword is your sword. It's desirable, however, that it be somewhat sword-like or evocative of the spirit of the attributes of air. Here are a few things I've used on the road for my magical sword. A plastic cocktail sword. Yes, the kind the bartender sticks through olives and cocktail onions. Granted, it's a little small, but in a pinch, it works great. A hotel silverware knife. I know what I said about a knife, but in a pinch, what they deliver on room service sometimes has to work. Now, a fan. Hang on. A fan. A magic fan, the instrument of air, is the Eastern equivalent to the sword. A viable fan can be made in seconds by folding and pleating a sheet of paper, or better yet, the laminated cardstock of hotel room service menus. I always pack a tiny little switchblade knife. Okay, I don't know. I don't even remember where I got it or who gave it to me. But when it's not, when the blade's not out, it's about that big. And I always carry it in my luggage. I always pack a tiny switchblade knife that looks like a miniature dagger when the blade is out. Okay. That's it for today. I've gone 31 minutes, which is, I'm sorry I had to do this song. It just, I couldn't help myself. This is one of my, okay, I don't have very many guitars. I'm not a collector. And, but anyway, this is a Taylor 12 fret. That means that the neck is short enough that it meets the body at the 12th fret. And so, and I got my little mini one, mini Martin, or mini Taylor that I travel with. Anyway, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. And tomorrow we will talk about the Magic Cup. It'll be a little shorter tomorrow, I promise you. Until then, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.